Sahana bhavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahai, tejasvinavaditam astoma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy, and may we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. May our study be illumined, and peace, peace, and peace be unto all. So today, of course, is the usual Vedanta Series question and answers. Now, I have some questions that were sent in. I'm going to deal with that, but it also happens to be Swami Turiyananda's tithi puja. That is his birthday, according to the lunar calendar. And so I hope to weave all these things into one. Anyway, I'll read the questions out and then we can see. So Guru Maharaj, that means Ramakrishna Paramahansa, 19th century mystic, in response to a question said, we have passions like anger and lust. What shall we do with these? And so he gives an answer to that, which I'll go into shortly. But he does give an answer. Whenever we extract a passage from scripture, and scripture is simply the record, firstly, of enduring principles directly experienced on the one side. And then as a result of that, a kind of model of behavior or values presented. And the values presented will be suitable for the student. That means everybody is at a different place in their spiritual evolutionary life. What you give to one person, you cannot necessarily give to another. And we have to look at the context of the question. But before we do that, we have to bear in mind that this is Swami Turiyananda's birthday also. And when he had met Sri Ramakrishna, it's important to understand how he met him first. And I'll read out a description. So he first met Sri Ramakrishna when he was 13, 14. Met means he saw him for the first time. So if we talk about any mystic or great person or God-man or prophet or saint, we really have to understand how they looked, physically how they looked, and how they spoke and how they behaved. These are very important things. So this is one example of the first impression when he is only a teenager. Of course, his name is Harinath. So he says that he watched as Hriday, that is Ramakrishna's nephew, helped Ramakrishna get down from a horse carriage, no cars in those days. The master was in ecstasy. And later Harinath wrote about this first impression. He says, the master appeared very thin. He had a shirt on and his cloth was securely tied around his waist. One of his feet was on the step of the carriage and the other was inside. He was in a semi-conscious state. When he got down, what a wonderful sight. There was an indescribable radiance over his face. And I thought, he says, I have heard from the scriptures about the great sage Shukadeva. Is he the same Shukadeva? Then Ramakrishna was taken to the second floor of Dinanath Basu's house, and Hari followed him. Regaining a little consciousness of the outer world, the master saw a portrait of Mother Kali on the wall. He bowed down to her and then thrilled the audience by singing a song describing the oneness of Krishna and Kali. So much information is gotten from this brief description. First of all, we have an image that impresses the youngster, an image of holiness, but more than that, an image of radiant holiness that was picked up. Then the next thing is, after regaining a little consciousness, so in other words, he saw this entity in a state of holiness, in a mental state that we are not normally in. Now, an idea came to me this morning, and I thought I should write it down. And it came in the form of a question. If we are not thinking of God all the time, what are we thinking of? And then the answer came to me, see, largely we're thinking of ourselves. Of course, we might be thinking of all kinds of things, but primarily when you watch the mind, you're thinking of yourself. So bear that in mind as we go forward. The Ramakrishna state is not thinking of his physical self. He's not thinking of the person Ramakrishna. A completely different state. Our normal conscious state will be primarily to think of ourselves. But this is just an extension of what nature has to offer all biological organisms. Swami Vivekananda commented once, nobody can eat food with as much gusto as a dog. So their consciousness is there at the food level. And no doubt, when we want to delight the sense of taste, our consciousness is exactly at the same level. Not much difference. And then all of our life, for most people, will be in gathering food. You might put it in sophisticated language. You might say that you have a job with a career. You might say you go to work every day and that you do activities that brings a salary. But I don't think anybody will work if there's no salary at the end of it. So it's basically food gathering in a more sophisticated way, that's all. Using our more sophisticated version of creativity, using our thinking capacity, our analyzing capacity. But essentially, the number one is myself first. What is spiritual life? It's a movement toward a position that says myself last, other things first. And that only comes about when we put God first, what we call God. And so it says, he bowed down to this image of Mother Kali and then thrilled the audience by singing a song, we may add spontaneously, about what? About the oneness of different aspects. In other words, different sectarian approaches. In this case, those who are worshippers of the mother form of God and those who are devotees of Krishna. There are people who fight over these sectarian points of view. My approach is right, your approach is right, wrong. And in a broader context, beyond the sectarian point of view of mere Hinduism, we can say that Christians are fighting intra fighting. There's interfaith disunity and there's interfaith disunity. And we can only boil it down to this lack of understanding of a oneness. So spiritual life is intrinsically about oneness. And the more we feel this oneness, the less we feel this individual necessity to be different and to approach life from a selfish point of view. Oftentimes actually, we don't register it as a selfish point of view. Now it goes on like this. Gradually, Harinath, and by the way, I'm quoting from the book, God Lived With Them, compiled by Swami Turiyananda. Gradually, Harinath became familiar with Ramakrishna and began to ask all sorts of personal questions. Sir, he asked one day, how can one become free from lust completely? This is the identical question, only highlighting one of the passages that our questioner has asked. And Sri Ramakrishna replies like this, and here's the answer basically. Why should it go? Why shouldn't all these things stay? Like a true psychologist, he's saying, don't get rid of anything. Because what we call lust and greed and anger, these are the three primary gateways to hell as it's described in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and all the other passions are associated with these three things. Something I want, something I want to avoid, and to do with the procreation of the species, and to do with eating and drinking. The most fundamental basic instinct is eating, food, associated with smell, sense of smell, and associated with the primary element, earth, When it rains, you can smell the earth. Wonderful. But it is this earthiness, this fundamental survival mode, that represents itself as a selfishness. Let me benefit. Let me eat first. And whatever's left over, I can give to you. And turns around as still using food, still using the necessity to eat. Let you eat first. Whatever's left over, I can eat. That would be a wonderful thing, a wonderful spirit of generosity, the least selfish position. So don't get rid of all these passions. Where are they coming from? They're coming from an emotional side that has its origin in our root. And our root is described as Sat Chit Ananda. Just to remind you, existence. That is why we want to survive. Biological evolution says we want to survive, a struggle for the fittest. And the most successful at procreating and advancing the population of species are the most inclined to survive. But what is the inner urge to survive? It is because our nature is existence itself. And then what is the mechanism by which this unfolds? It is because there is a knowingness, a sense of gathering and making an information transfer that is called consciousness, and it expresses itself as intelligence. And then ultimately bliss. What does that mean? It means like drinking a nectar that never ends, surpassing every other joy you can imagine. And that expresses itself in so many different ways as a pursuit for pleasure, sensual pleasure, intellectual pleasure, cultural pleasure, domestic, social pleasure, love of company. And at the human procreative level, it comes out as relationships that end and culminate in the propagation of spirit, species, without which you and I will not be here to discuss it. These are necessary things. But now when they drag us down, they become against us. They become our enemies. But we can make them our friends. We can take the central energy expressed in the 6 different ways and use that energy in a diverted way. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, when he first met his teacher Bhairavi Brahmani, one of his original questions would have been, people say I'm mad. Am I actually mad? You're the expert. And she said, you are. But some people are mad for, and she listed all kinds of things that, and you alone are your worst enemy. So he says, how can one become free of lust completely is the question. And Sri Ramakrishna replies, why should it go? Give it a turn in another direction, is his answer. What is lust? It is the desire to get. He puts it as the basic thing. That's what it is. We want to get something. So desire to get God is his instruction. Have a desire for God. Have a desire for the vision of God. Have a desire for the closeness of God. And strengthen this desire greatly. In other words, start off with a small inkling, and then expand it. Daily expand it is how we would add. Expand it greatly so that it becomes a magnificent obsession, so it becomes prema, not just bhakti. That is ecstatic love. See, Sri Ramakrishna's way of teaching was simple, says the text, natural and very effective. He didn't ask any of his disciples to mortify themselves. Some other teachers will say, all right, go and meditate for 1,000 hours, or stand on one leg, or go into a cave, or take cold baths, or fast, or any of these things. He never said it. The more you go towards the east, is his example, the farther you will get from the west. The more you increase your love for God, the more your lust, anger, and jealousy will decrease. And when he says lust, anger, and jealousy, he's referring basically to these 6 passions. Just as examples, there are 6 of them. All right, fine. But the central ones are like that. Lust and greed. And he tirelessly said that. But he didn't say push it down. That would be bad psychology. It would be bad advice. Just give them a new turn. They are energetic. Give it a new energetic turn. That's all. Direct them Godwards. Yeah, I remember there was, and I gave this example previously, but it stands out in my memory, that I was being driven to the airport, and a devotee at a certain center asked me, he said, I need to increase my tapasya, that is my spiritual discipline. Now, spiritual discipline, understood by him, was mortification. In Christian mysticism, we find there's so many examples: whipping yourself, wearing hair shirts, depriving yourself of food, and so on and so forth. Of course, this is certainly one way of disciplining oneself. There's no doubt about that. But you don't really have to do that. I asked him, but are you a bhakti? He said, principally I practice jnana. I said, that's okay, that's good. But do you ever get angry? He says, all the time. I battle with my anger. I said, well, if you were a bhakti, you would take that and move that toward God. You'd channel it in a different way. Because the closer you get to God in love, the more these other things disappear by themselves without addressing them. Like making friends with any animal. You don't look at it in the eyes, or conquer it, or master it, or threaten it. It'll run away or attack you, one or the other. No, look in a certain direction, put your hand out, let the animal sniff the hand a little bit, then reach for the ear, stroke the ear, and then once you're comfortable with each other, the animal looks at you with an element of expectation and affection, and you do the same, seeing God there in, through, and as the animal. And then that seals the whole thing. And then you have a blessing effect. So another day, he said to Ramakrishna that he was not at all interested in women. Same theme is coming up. In fact, he couldn't bear them. He felt he was a monk. Now, there are some monks in some traditions who are forbidden even to look at women. They won't even sit in the same hall as women. But to this, the master replied, "You talk like a fool." He was quite direct. Looking down upon women, why? They are the manifestations of the Divine Mother. See, seeing the divinity there, everything just gets transformed. Nothing becomes your enemy. Everything becomes useful, and everything becomes a revelation of the divinity within. Bow down to them with respect. That is the only way, he says, to escape from their snares. And these fiery words permanently changed Harinath's attitude toward women. As Sri Ramakrishna tested his disciples, is another page, so the disciples verified the genuineness of their guru. One day, Harinath arrived at Dakshinaswar when the master was having his dinner, and he saw that a number of bowls containing various cooked items were placed before him. This is not a fasting man. Harinath thought that this kind of luxurious eating was unbecoming to a holy man. The master said at once, "Well, the tendency of my mind is always towards the infinite. It is by such rajasic devices that I hold it down to the lower planes. If you're a master of something, you can manipulate all these evolutionary forces, describe threefold as sattva, rajas, and tamas, and introduce a little more rajas if you want, provided sattva dominates. So how does a sattva dominate? He says, well, the tendency, that is the unconscious tendency of my mind, is always, not a break, always towards the infinite. It is by such rajasic devices, that is eating, that I hold it down to the lower planes. Otherwise, I couldn't talk with you. And Hari was dumbfounded. Another time at Balaram's house, Sri Ramakrishna was illustrating his teachings with some very apt tales. And Harinath was surprised at the spontaneity with which these stories cropped up in his talk. And he asked, "Sir, do you prepare your similes before you go out?" The master replies, "No, Mother is always present. Wherever I am, Mother, meaning the Divine Mother of the universe, supplies me with ideas." Now, I picked that up, of course, and I use it as a kind of formula. So if I'm giving a talk, and as you know, I don't really enjoy giving talks. It's more this kind of thing, a spontaneous question answer session, where I start with a blank page. And I think whatever ideas will come from the divine mother of the universe, or the cosmic mind, or the infinite invisible. These are different descriptions for the same thing. And that the current of thought belongs there. There's nothing to do with me. And providing I am open enough, it arrives and comes out through the mouth. So that's the way people are taught to speak. And then after that, after getting your original creative ideas, you can then make reference, you can back it up with supporting documentation or other people's profound ideas on it. So this is Swami Turiyananda, a great, great monk. And actually, I put in the I put in extra thought today that was to do with Swami Turiyananda, and it absolutely encapsulates what his temperament and life was. I said, "He who to plunge does hesitate will not know the blissful state. He goes with water, jug, and cloth, delighting in the state of fourth." Now, Turiyananda means he who has the bliss of the fourth state of consciousness. We call it a state for convenience term, but it's actually not a state at all. 3 states of consciousness are there. This is the waking state, in which we have some kind of multiple and multiplicity of experience, I plus others, and we orientate everything toward the I and match everything else with others. And the second verse of what I was reading says, "Praise to Master's mind control, who lives in freedom of the soul, to bear the pain and not complain, stands surely on a higher plane." So this movement is matched by teachers, scriptures, resources, holy companionship, and so on. Chains, whether of iron or gold, will the prisoner fast still hold. For lion's freedom to restore announces with a mighty roar. To hot or cold, rock impervious, in detached attention glorious. For neither am I food nor eater, nor am I the food processor. For I am self, and all in all, hunger cannot make me fall. And this is a whole description of the wonderful life of this Turiyananda, who literally never reacted to what we would normally react to in terms of contrasting pain, pleasure, etc. One instance was there where an abscess had to be cut. He challenged the surgeon. He said, "You know, you can do this without anesthetic." And the surgeon was a little reluctant to do that. And so, unfortunately, but he said, "I tell you what, you let me know if we do this without anesthetic. You let me know when you're going into this withdrawal state, this fourth state, this detached state. Because the problem is that even a small amount of movement in this physical body will tend to get somebody out of that state." So he said, "All right, you tell me when you're doing it, and then we'll deal with it that way." And he had this capacity to completely detach. He was a wonderful teacher, teaching mainly for much of his monastic life in America. So a wonderful monk like that. I'm going to come back to the original question, though. And here is from the Gospel of Ramakrishna, where this question is originally asked. And we have to understand the context of it. The context of it begins on Wednesday, May 2nd, 1883. And the context is that it's in the afternoon, about 5 o'clock, and Sri Ramakrishna arrives at the premises, the temple of the Brahma Samaj. And just to summarize, the master bows at the temple and he raises a question that has previously been asked to him. So as soon as the master entered the worship hall, he bowed low before the dais, and having taken his seat, he said to Mahendranath Gupta, the author of this Gospel of Ramakrishna, and the other devotees, Narendra once asked me, what good is there in bowing before the Brahma Samaj temple? The sight of the temple recalls to my mind God alone. Now he's introducing this term, and we have to understand what Brahma Samaj views about God. It's the impersonal entity. Then God consciousness is kindled in my mind, he says. God is present where people talk about him. One feels there the presence of all the holy places. Places of worship recall God alone into my mind. Now, coming back to the original question then about the six passions, how will the six passions affect us if our mind is always orientated in this way? If everything we see, we touch, we feel, we taste is all just a trigger that reminds us about, in a series of progressions inward, about the inwardness of things where we find a source, this infinite invisible. Not just find it, but feel it and feel a oneness with it. Once a devotee was overwhelmed with ecstasy at the sight of a bhabla tree. The idea flashed in his mind that the handle of the axe used in the garden of the temple of Radhakanta was made from the wood of this. Another devotee had such devotion for his guru that he would be overwhelmed with divine feeling at the sight of his guru's neighbors, never mind the guru. Krishna consciousness would be kindled in Radha's mind at the sight of a cloud, a blue dress, or a painting of Krishna. She would become restless and cry like a mad person, Krishna, where art thou? Then Gosal asks, but madness is not desirable. He actually makes a statement. It's like a question. So the master wants clarification. He says, what do you mean? Was Radha's madness the madness that comes from brooding over worldly objects and makes one unconscious? Don't forget, he's also experienced this madness of Radha. One attains that madness by meditating on God. Haven't you heard of love madness and knowledge madness? And the Brahmo devotee said, well, how can one realize God? It's a similar question. The master's answer is to do with this question directly, and it says, how you do it, how you realize God. By directing, that's the emphasis, by directing your love to him and constantly reasoning that God alone is real and the world illusory. Let's examine that statement. It's a very beautiful and profound statement. So, directing your love to him. Love is only a single energy. What we call lust, what we call greed, etc., the six passions, is just a direction of this energy. We gather all this energy and move it in a different direction. So it's a direction, and a direction is a conscious action, a conscious movement. We have to consciously direct all our emotions, all our feelings to that one. Then what about the mind? We have to also constantly reason that this entity that religions calls God alone is real and the world is illusory. This is not found in basic theology in most religions. And therein lies a difficulty. If we make a separation between the world or the creation and the creator, no doubt it has a benefit because we can honor the creation. And when we do that, it reminds us of the creator and gives us a sense of thankfulness. But a deeper understanding will be that all this world is illusory. There's no concrete creation in it. And what is the benefit of understanding? In contrast to that, only God is real. Only that is real. The Aswatha tree alone is permanent. Its fruit is transitory. That's a good example. You take a tree, any tree you like that yields fruit, and you see the one that endures in the example will be the tree, but the fruit comes and goes. And in the philosophy, we find that the word phalam or the word fruit is used for results of your actions. They're all temporary. Then the Brahma continues to ask, we have passions like anger and lust. What shall we do with these? Now the answer comes that the question is quoting. Again, it's the same answer, but now he's expanding it. Direct the 6 passions to God, all of them. Then he comes more specific. The impulse of lust should be turned into the desire to have intercourse with the Atman, a mystic union where lover and beloved become the one. Feel angry at those who stand in your way to God. Yes, anger is an energy, and anger arises when a desire is thwarted. The one worthwhile desire is desire for truth or desire for God, same thing. And when that it gets thwarted, all that energy that we call anger gets directed like that, not in a harmful way, but in a way where these are directed. The energy is directed. Feel greedy for him. Imagine how much greed we have for wealth, for money, for acquisitions, for properties, for enjoyments, for pleasures, and so on. So all this comes under greed. Feel greedy for him. Say, for instance, my Rama, my Krishna belongs to you. God belongs to you. Think, I'll extend this, think that God is as dependent on your love as you are on him. This is the human love put into a divinized form. If you must have pride, then feel like Vibhishana. Vibhishana, who said, I have touched the feet of Rama with my head. I will not bow this head before anyone else. And then Brahma devotee asks again another aspect of this. If it is God that makes me do everything, then I'm not responsible for my sins. This is a very, very common position, fatalism. And Master, in his characteristic way, smiles. Yes, Duryodhana also said that, O Krishna, I do what thou, seated in my heart, makes me do. If a man has the firm conviction that God alone is the doer and he is his instrument, then he cannot do anything sinful. He who has learned to dance correctly never makes a false step. One cannot even believe in the existence of God until one's heart becomes pure. These are very, very profound words, and let us examine them. If a person has a firm conviction, we have to ask, how does a person get such a firm conviction? That entity that religion calls God alone is the one that's doing, and this that I normally register as important, my ego that produces selfishness, is nothing more than an instrument comprising of a body-mind association, a kind of compound with parts. Then he cannot do anything that is sinful. Another way of saying it is anything that is ignorant or selfish. And he has learned to dance correctly. never makes a false step. When we begin learning a craft or a skill, we will make many errors and mistakes. It is a difficulty in many religions to characterize it as something that is sinful and therefore something we should feel guilty about. No, in any practice, mistakes will happen. And we have to be forgiving of these mistakes in ourselves and also in others. But when you practice to the extent that it's automatic, it's entered into the habit level, and now you have the freedom not to concentrate on the technicality of it, but to freely express your creative dance. There's a great difference. One cannot even believe in the existence of God until one's heart becomes pure. All our job in spirituality is simply polishing the mind, making sure it is absolutely pure without any element of uh, ignorance. Ignorance is really what it is. We have to remove the ignorance. We have some examples of that, yes. You want to look in a mirror, you can't see the image because there's dust and dirt and grime. You clean it off, then it becomes clear. You can see a small inclination of it, a small hint about it. If you cannot see the fire because there's smoke, then the smoke clears away, the fire gets seen. If you want to see the sun and clouds are in the way, when the clouds move on, the sun gets revealed. It's in revelation. It's not in something new. It is already there. And so when we clean the mind, there was a profound statement Jesus made, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. That means the mind, polishing the mind. Then polish the body and polish the mind. And that means that the mind is so orientated toward the reality of this infinite invisible that everything you see, everything you hear, everything you touch, taste, in other words, our common experience, becomes registered to the divine. It leads you like a signpost there. It's not an end in itself. Okay, thank you, thank you. And we can, if you have an inclination to do it, there's this very useful book, very comprehensive book. God Lived with Him by Swami Turiyananda. And then if you like today or sometime, you can turn this to the biography of Swami Turiyananda and allow the opportunity of his birthday to inspire you through his life, his character, and his teachings. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.